Really interesting episode today. I think we're up at number 47. We had David Gray, one of the first ones that I actually could have considered calling down to him because he's only about 20 minutes away from me. Damien, what did you find most interesting?
I suppose to kind of cover over a lot of it, just how interconnected everything in our body is, from our breathing down to managing strength in around our ankles. Everything is linked, and often we tend to look at different parts of or different injuries or different approaches to training in a very focused area. Say, I'm trying to build up my quad strength or something like that through like a gym workout or something, but actually we might be missing the wood from the trees a little bit there, and kind of not focusing on basic things that our sport, basic demands that our sport might have on us. So I felt like he covered a lot in great detail, but we had given us some good practical takeaways there as well.
I think it was excellent the way we looked at the importance of coordination, and that some teams, some players now do not have access to gyms, even with stuff having opened up. Just around factoring stuff in over the course of the week, it can be difficult to get in a full session where you build in your heavy loading, whereas we discuss some exercises that will train the key movements with some perturbations around your coordination and different variations of them that will still allow you to develop strength, that increase power, speed, wherever it may be, but also create that protection around the joints that we are most likely to injure, which I still think is one of the keys you need to focus on when it comes to managing players or over the course of the season. So everyone, hope you enjoy David Gray.
Dave, tell us a little bit about you. I know you from I suppose Instagram, for following you for the past few years, but I suppose just to, maybe if you could give us a little bit of a background for our listeners to who you are and kind of what got you into the line of work that you're in at the moment.
I'll try my best. Some people know me from Instagram, which is a funny thing, but it's a strange one, isn't it? But I'm effectively someone who works with people who are falling kind of on the rehab continuum, and it's mostly movement-based stuff. It's all movement-based stuff, to be honest, that I work with. So I'm a neuromuscular physical therapist, but I try my best not to identify as I'm a this, because I just work on movement mostly with people, and it's just improving people's movement, pain, rehab, getting them back to sport, and or not necessarily sport. Maybe they don't care about sport, but just getting back to some kind of enjoying their body, enjoying their lives. So I'm working with quite a broad range of people. So it's actually almost split down in half, I would say. So 50% of my kind of that side of things is professional athletes, Olympic athletes, high level athletes, very high level athletes. The other 50% is just people who want to go for a run on the weekend or play a little bit of GA or a little bit of soccer or whatever. And then, so that probably makes up 50% of my business is those two things. And then the other half is coaching or kind of mentoring or consulting with coaches and some of their athletes as well. So we have like a lot of very good athletes around the world and very good coaches in NFL, NBA, professional soccer, professional rugby that would consult and would be asking questions around how do I do this with a squad or with a person, or just teach me some things about movement, or here's some specific questions I have. So it's kind of half education and consulting, and then half just helping people just with their own movement. And kind of how did I get to that was a very long story involving a lot of injuries and a lot of pain and a lot of heartbreak and heartache over the years, trying to play GA so I was trying to play senior football and senior hurling for my club in Waterford, and then senior football for Waterford, which like is not so in such a good place at the moment, I suppose, the county. But for a while there, it looked like we were starting to make some strides in that, and it just kind of it's after falling apart a little bit in the last few years. But at the time when I was trying to play, it was like we were trying to push on and become a very professional type of setup, and my body did not love that amount of training at the time, and I ended up with a lot of knee issues, hip issues, Achilles tendon issues, and I just got very, very frustrated with the advice that I was getting over the years from physios and coaches and surgeons and doctors, and I just said, screw this, I'm going to try and figure it out for myself. And basically that's been kind of a 10-year journey to trying to figure that out, travel the world, learn, and what took me 10 years, like, to try and sort out my own body or figure some things out, is unfortunate, because there was a lot of regret there in terms of my own athletic career. Not that it was ever going to be amazing, but could have been a bit better than it was. But luckily now you can help a lot of people in a lot shorter time frame. So I try to see the positives on that side of things. But yeah, so that's kind of where I'm at the moment. A lot of the work is online at the moment, and a lot of the work then, hopefully when COVID is over now, we'll be doing a lot of traveling and teaching some workshops around the world, and spending some time with some pretty cool athletes for a couple of weeks at a time.
That's that's very cool. That was something I was hoping to kind of chat with you about today. How have you found, I suppose, with your programming and with your working with people, have you found the movement of everyone in home, with lockdowns, has that kind of increased your accessibility to people, or how have you found that over the last year?
Yeah, so one of my big things is, like, movement quality comes first. So just, like, really good movement comes first. And luckily we don't need a lot of equipment to actually just train really good movement. But we have to be careful when we talk about good movement, because one, there's a spectrum, there's a bandwidth there. But two, I think unfortunately most coaches don't really have a clue what actually good movement is, and they would say it's getting stronger in a back squat is good movement, and I would argue very strongly against something like that. Not that that couldn't be part of good movement, but that is not what I would define as good movement. So I think yes, because I basically, when COVID hit, we released a program called Lower Body Basics, and 5,000 people across the world have done it now. Actually, 5,000 people have bought it, but I would say probably 150,000 people have done it, and including, I know, like, entire professional international rugby teams and soccer teams that have one person, their S&C coach, bought it and used it with their entire team. So during lockdown and during camp and all that stuff. So yes, we've been able to probably get some of our work out there a lot better over COVID, just because some of the gyms were taken away from people, and people just had to do something else, and they realized that something else can be sometimes a lot better than what they were doing in the first place. So yeah, so good. I think working on good movement doesn't require a whole lot of equipment, and that's been a big lesson, I think, for a lot of people over COVID. Not just on my programs or anything, but for a lot of people, make do. You can make a lot of gains without a whole lot of equipment, and most people, there's so much low-hanging fruit there that they can just grab and feel and move a lot better without getting super fancy at all.
I'm finding a couple of resistance bands really helpful now. Just once a week at the end of training, do a 15-minute kind of strength-based circuit, and just, focus in on the movement with a little bit of external load through a band, through, a rail along the side of the pitch. Even just a football to hold, concentrate on balancing something else is huge help, and hopefully will have a knock-on impact on lower injuries as the season goes on.
Yeah, I think so. Them little, like a ball, something like that, like little perturbations, being able to, like, if you understand kind of biomechanics and movement, it helps you with your loading, because I know that if I do a lunge and I reach my ball up overhead, I'm probably going to get length through my abdominals and I'm going to load my quad a bit more. If I do a lunge and I reach the ball forward in front of me, I'm probably going to get a bit of length through my hamstring and a bit more hip flexion, and I'm going to load my glute a bit more. If I'm my lunge with my right foot in front and I reach the ball over to the left side, I'm going to end up in external rotation at my right hip, and I might feel that I shorten my glute max a little bit more and I get length through some of my adductors. Versus the opposite is I use my adductors a bit more. If I don't let my heel hit the floor, I'll probably use my calf and my ankle a bit more. If I do let my heel hit the floor, I might get a little bit more of a posterior tilt, and I'm going to just use my hamstrings and try and shorten a bit more. So, like, there's a million options you just have to understand how these, like the movement of the bones and the different reaches, can bias load into certain tissues. I think that's so cool. But people would typically just say, I just do a lunge with 2 dumbbells by my side. And like, yes, I can keep making the dumbbells heavier, or I can challenge where I load, how I load, the speed of movement, the type of movement I do. A million things that I can challenge. Do I reach before my foot hits the floor? Do I reach after my foot hits the floor? A million things, and there's so many options there, and so much like value that can help people to just move outside of a straight line. And is strength really just moving in a straight line, or is it actually, as soon as you reach the ball to the left at all and have some frontal plane or some transverse plane, your entire body just falls to shit?
And is it a case then of being quite focused in on what it is at the end I want to improve? Like, I know this group of players need to increase glute hamstring, this group of players need to increase quad, or is it worth having a variety over the course of a 4-week blocks that you're developing them all around, or are you kind of falling somewhere in between?
I think both. Yeah, I think both. Like, especially if you're working with a group, like, it's very hard to be very specific, and some people need, so I'm just more about like just, and even some of my programs, I don't really care if everyone does every single thing that are in the program. I just want to expose people to different things, and people start to feel, Jesus, I am good when I do this one, but when I do this one I'm awful, and maybe they just do a little bit more of that. So both. But then if you're working with an individual, you can get very specific. But I know, like, we just went back GA training, and we just did, they had like a CrossFit type of coach, and we just did 1,000,000 billion lunges, which are just keep lunging forward, and like, that can be frustrating to me, because, which is a bad thing, because I don't want to be thinking about things when I'm actually training myself. I just want to do it. But I know some of the lads have gotten some very cranky knees from just doing that again and again and again. And the way he has us lunging is very quad dominant, and there's very little hamstring or glute involved, I would say. So, or calf even involved. So I would say, like, if that was me, maybe some of those lunges, yes, I would do for a few days or a couple of training sessions, and then I try and tweak it up where I'm reaching forward more, I'm reaching down with my right hand as my, like, to touch the floor, I'm getting lateral flexion through the spine one way or the other, and just vary it up, and you're probably not going to get as cranky. And also, like, I can lunge, maybe my knee comes towards my big toe, maybe my knee goes towards my little toe, maybe I lunge across my body more, maybe I lunge and open out the legs more. A million things to play around with and just vary, and like, that keeps athletes on their toes as well, because every single step isn't the same. There's just always small little things that are happening, you know.
And I suppose just with all that's keeping in mind, say, maybe a lot of our listeners here would be coaches, or maybe we'd have a few S&C coaches and that here as well. But we'd have some maybe just actual sports coaches, like, say, actual GA coach or soccer coach or basketball coach, someone like that, who might be actually having to double over as an S&C in some cases. And that, what would you have any kind of are there anything that you have noticed from, I suppose, your clients or your experience of working with teams, that there's just common mistakes when there isn't maybe an S&C professional there maybe to spot things? Is there anything that you'd kind of suggest as a kind of a safe way to approach prehab maybe, or anything like that?
Good question. I think warm up, everyone is doing a warm up, so I like warm ups as a way to, like, do all the same things as we're normally doing, but also to work on, like, sprinting mechanics and running mechanics. I think it's a great time to get some of that work in. And some people think, like, oh, they're just drills that we learn off, where, yeah, once you've learned the drill, you've got it. But, like, not really, because if you're doing a warm-up anyway, I'd rather not have plodding running in as part of it, and I'd rather have, like, every time my foot hits the floor, it feels like it's more of a pop off the floor. So, like, even the high knee drills, stuff like that, like, I just don't like, because this is the same in the rehab process with people, I don't like plodding running. I don't like just plod along. Because if you think about, like, if you get someone in a gym and especially if you're trying to rehab them, or just get them a little bit more reactive, a little bit stronger, you're probably going to be saying, like, don't spend too long on the floor in that plyometric. Like, pop, feel that springiness. And then we go into a warm-up, and it's like, run out to the 45, high knees, plod along, kick your heels to your butt, plod along, and all that reactivity is just gone straight away. So little things like that are super important, and I would try and take out as much of the plodding as possible. You'll get it in a game anyway, or a game situation where like the ball is up the other end, and I do my little bit of plodding when I need to recover, but like we don't want to ingrain that or train that into people. I think the banded, some of the, I wouldn't be a big fan if people followed my work like of a massive amount of the glute clams or anything like that. I think it's not that they're bad. I definitely don't want to say that, and like they that stuff can definitely work, but you're probably seeing people, the more they struggle to feel their glutes or get their glutes working very well, they're probably people that just don't move very well in the first place. Like their pelvis is locked up, they can't get them hips to shift side to side and stuff like that. So I would place an emphasis on movement quality and like how the bones actually move rather than the muscles, if that makes sense. I think muscles will trick you. Like you could have 30 people on the field and saying like, oh, do you feel your glutes? You would have to ask everyone, do you feel your glutes here? Some are getting TFL, some are getting lateral hip, some are getting glute max, some are getting their quad. But like, if you look at people running, jogging, lunging, doing all of these different types of movements, them movements don't trick you. If you have any idea of how to look at movement, like you say, yeah, he can move well, he can't move well, he can't move well, yeah, he's not too bad. So I would start to try and take, it's not a practical thing, maybe like, oh, do this drill, but I would say try and take a mentality of looking at movement rather than worrying as much about the muscle itself. If the movement is good, the muscle will be doing its job. If you focus on muscle all of the time, are you stretching your hamstrings? Are you activating your glutes? It doesn't mean anything about the movement, and you'll very rarely see improvements, in my opinion.
That's it's very interesting. I suppose like often you might, or I've come across, maybe you've seen similar, that like warm-ups are they're a great opportunity to work on things. Mm-hmm. But if it's just kind of like in the psyche of maybe those who are warming up, that we just need to get through this, and then the real training starts after it, that often warm-ups can be kind of less than ideal or less than optimal, I suppose. But that's brilliant. I suppose one of the reasons that I was like really excited to kind of chat with you today was just because of, I suppose, the way you go about your training. As I said, look, and I know we mentioned it's kind of weird when you think of it. It's like, I know you from Instagram, but it's like a lot of the videos and stuff that you have up, you've people doing very kind of controlled and I suppose what look to be simple movements, but then when you take in, people's expressions and stuff, you're like, wow, people are really working very hard in this small range. Mm-hmm. How have you found kind of how did you get to that point where you really started to nail that down to your lower body basics and stuff, mm-hmm. to really highlight some of the areas that people are maybe more commonly struggling with? I'm still working on that, like all the time. I change my mind every day, so there's no like I've made it or I'm here, I have all the answers. Definitely not. The lower body basics, basically I had like my calendar was booked up for 3 months in advance at that time, and I said, right, like how can I make money without seeing more people? So I just sat down and wrote a program, and I literally sat down, like as regards your question, I sat down and it was like, what are the things basically I want every client to be able to do based off basically all the common issues, and when we understand movement, where someone's symptoms crop up in like one person's groin issue is another person's hip flexor, is another person's hamstring. Like, yes, we need specific things for those specific tissues, but all of those tissues attached to the pelvis, and we would like to see
the pelvis working and moving really well in 3 planes of motion. So I have some pelvic drills there that move in 3 planes of motion and get things happening. And people who have stretched for 10 years to try and loosen their hamstrings or whatever it is, they'll do a couple of those drills and then they'll say, my hamstrings aren't tight anymore. And it was because the bones that the muscle attached to just didn't move at all, or very well at all. So that's one thing. Like pelvic, I put a massive emphasis on pelvis movement in 3 planes of motion. I think most people focus on, like, if you talk about hip mobility with most people, they focus on the femur. So they start to rotate and do cars and all these things for their femur. And they don't realize that the pelvis makes up a big part of the hip also. And it's a big, massive, like, center of your body, big chunk of bone in there that should have relative motion within the pelvis, and then the whole pelvis should be able to move, and a lot of people really struggle with that. Then if we think about the pelvis, we have to think about the rib cage, because how we breathe and how the ribs actually move has a direct impact and a direct correlation on the pelvis. So, and people can feel this in their own bodies. As soon as they drive their chest up into the air, their pelvis will spill forward into more of an anterior tilted position. So it's a little bit of a paradox, and the opposite. When I let my chest drop and my ribs come down, my pelvis will tuck under, or hopefully that's what will happen. So trainers in the gym will often say, or people will often say, anterior tilt is bad, right? Because hamstrings get a bit lengthened there, a lot of load goes through the front of the pelvis, the hip flexors will get tight, and I won't get much glute or not activation, but the glute won't be operating from its ideal length tension relationship, let's say. So we know that anterior tilt is not a bad thing, but also it's not optimal to be stuck there. But then people go and cue people to have their chest up in the gym all of the time. But if you understand biomechanics, chest up is an anterior tilt. They happen at the same time. So cueing one thing is cueing the exact same thing at the pelvis. So that's when I was like, okay, like I need to get people to learn to breathe and get their ribs to just drop down into a nice position, get the pelvis to move in 3 planes of motion. Then we have some very nasty hamstring exercises in the program, which is I have strength standards basically for every athlete, and this includes some of the very best athletes in the world, like on $10-15 million a year, and like someone who wants to go for a run on the weekend. And I want them all to hit my standards for isometric strength for the hamstrings, because I think isometric hamstring strength is like ground zero. We should be able to get that, and I think it's more important than a Nordic curl, to be honest. I think it's more important than eccentric strength. Not that you have to choose one or the other, but I just need to make sure people get their hamstring isometric strength first, and that's like on their back in a foam roller bridge, which people might have seen on my stuff, or like on their heel, which is more just pure hamstring strength, and then the foot on the wall or stuff like that is more intermuscular coordination, where I get the foot, the calf, and the hamstring working together. So if most athletes could nail isometric hamstring strength, which we kind of know, we're kind of starting to think that's what's happening with the hamstrings in late swing phase and stance phase, is the hamstrings are in an isometric. There's an argument over that for much smarter people than me, so I won't get involved in it. But I still think isometric hamstrings are important. I think being able to get your foot to pronate and supinate is very important. I think being able to get co-contractions around the knee joint is very important. And then getting the pelvis and the ribs to move in 3 planes of motion are very important. So they would be my tick all those boxes, and you're probably going to be in a really good place. So that's what I like to do with every person, and that's what one or all of those things will definitely be people will struggle with, especially if they're in a lot of pain or haven't been moving very well. I know that's probably went all over the place there, but hopefully that makes sense.
Can you just explain to us, what are co-contractions around the knee joint there?
So co-contractions can happen everywhere in the body. So basically, if you think about a more traditional model of movement, what muscles are doing, it's like, if you think about your elbow, might be an easy way to think about it. So if I do a bicep curl,
like an agonist and antagonist, is it?
Agonist and antagonist, yeah. So the bicep shortens and the tricep lengthens, and then the opposite, the tricep shortens and the bicep lengthens to straighten my elbow. So And that does happen, right? But it's a quite a reductionist way of looking at things, especially as speed of movement increases and environmental constraints are put on us. Because, okay, I have an agonist and an antagonist, but now I have a 120 kilo rugby player running at me, and I want to hand him off, which means I want my wrist to be very stiff, my elbow joint to be very stiff, and if he hits me and like only the agonist or only the antagonist contracts, then I probably don't have an elbow or a shoulder anymore. So they both need to, all the muscles around the joint need to co-contract together even before he hits me. So there's pre-tensioning, and they all co-contract together to stabilize the joint, and that's what allows me to kind of, one, like brace for impact. Two, it's a simple body at that stage. So if you take this down to the foot and say, right, my foot is swinging through the air and my foot is going to hit the floor, you're probably better off thinking of it as the floor is going to hit my foot. And if you're a brain and you're saying, I'm going to wait until the floor hits me to then decide to contract my agonist or my antagonist, which might be my hamstring or my quad or my calf, then it's going to be too late, because these things happen in milliseconds, right? So it's going to pre-tension all these joints, especially around the ankle joint and the knee joint, before my foot hits the floor. It should be able to pre-tension and co-contract around all these joints. And then that's a simple body, because the body has just the brain, not even the brain, sorry, the muscular, it doesn't even go up to the brain. It's a spinal cord thing and it's a reflexive thing. So these muscles co-contract together, and now all the muscles are in an isometric, and now that can just disperse force everywhere around the body, rather than waiting to lengthen or shorten to get tension into a muscle. It's too late. So a lot of the people that with knee issues, you will see an inability to co-contract around the knee joint. Basically, everyone kind of understands that we need knee stability, but they don't understand how to get that. And it's actually the synergy between the calf and the hamstring, and then the co-activation of the quadriceps as well, that all need to time together. It's a coordinated movement, and you will not get that from doing more squats. It's a very coordinated reflexive movement that needs to happen before my foot hits the floor, when my foot hits the floor, and that's what allows the glute max. Then I stabilize the knee joint, the glute max gets a chance to build tension and push me forward. So a lot of people that can do glute drills for the next 20 years, if they can't get co-contractions around the knee joint and the ankle joint, the glute is this shorter, thicker muscle that needs time to produce force. It never gets a chance because the knee goes or the ankle goes, and I just kind of end up falling forward more, or my back muscles almost pull me forward and my hip flexors, because I haven't set that up through the whole chain.
And that co-contraction, is that like you would notice the stiffness around the ankle of particularly of a sprinter when they're running? If you look at them, they have their dorsiflexed and ready, so their front of their foot is ready to hit the ground and spring them forward. They're ready for that, and that's what gives them that more reactive or dynamic strength each time they hit the ground.
Yeah, it's performance and health, because that's what protects them as well. Because there could be 8 times body weight, whatever, it could be more going through their body. So that foot will usually be a little bit more dorsiflexed before they hit the floor. Because what's that going to do? It's going to tension the arches of the feet. It's going to tension the calf. It's going to tension the tibialis, all that lower leg. And then there's a bit of stiffness there. Now, that doesn't mean like the foot won't move. It should strike in that more stiff position. It will yield into a slightly more pronated position, and then it will spring off again. But definitely before contact, there is that pre-activation, pre-tensioning that will occur, and that a lot of that will stay throughout until the glute gets a chance to push, the hip extends through, and then you'll see energy coming back down the chain. So the hip will extend, then the knee will extend, and then the ankle will extend. So, you'll see a lot of people talking about triple extension, as if all these things happen together. Like, this is it's the silliest concept I've ever heard, because it's messing up a lot of people that try and force the triple extension to happen, like really aggressively triple extend. It's not. It's a glute. It's a hip glute. then the knee, and then the ankle, and that's energy transferring through the chain. If your knee extends too soon, you've not got a chance to finish the glute, and all the timing has messed up. So the triple extension happens as a result of the push. It's not like I triple extend to try and get me to come forward.
When you mentioned stiffness there, I think it's something people often have misconception about. It's not stiff as in like, oh God, my lower back is stiff because, I don't know, I just haven't been moving well or haven't been stretching or anything like that.
Yeah.
It's a stiffness more like, I think the best example is a diving board. Like it's hard, it's rigid, but when you jump up and down on it, it creates extra force that allows you to go higher and propel you higher up into the air. It's that type of stiffness we're looking at it. That ideally you want your, we'll just stick with the heel or the ankle area for now. It's that stiffness is there, but when it hits the ground, it's like a diving board propelling you up and forwards again.
Yeah, it's not that the joint is stiff that it can't go into the movement. It's not like my hip is so stiff that I can't internally rotate. It's that I need to be able to create stiffness when I need it. But it's not that it's just like I just don't have a hip anymore. So it's or a foot anymore. It needs to be able to pronate and supinate a little bit at least. It's just the stiffness is a coordinated movement between the muscles and the fascial system and all of this, and it's a practiced movement, because the more I practice my plyometrics, my sprinting, presuming I'm practicing in some kind of decent way, like the body just learns this stuff because it wants to protect itself and you want to move faster. But it just so happens that these two things happen together, because more stiffness, now up to a certain point, we don't want to get too stiff either, but up to a certain point, more stiffness means more protection around the joints and probably a springier athlete.
And we develop that stiffness from well thought out and put together plyos with a level of strength and stuff there as part to support it, really.
And coordination. So we have to understand like the key attractors of running and of movement. So if your foot isn't striking in the right position on the floor, then you're either going to get way too much stiffness where you just stab the floor, or else like you're not going to get any. So it's like if your back leg keeps swinging back too much behind you, you get too much backside mechanics, that's gonna kind of affect the whip of the hip and all this stuff. The swing leg, the foot needs to be coming back to you as your foot hits the floor. And this goes back to all the stuff that I'm talking about with like the warm-ups and the plodding running, like, oh, you're nearly ready to go back to sport now after a hamstring tear. Go and do 10 laps of the field and like try and get your conditioning that way. And so we trained them in the gym. We started to train our plyometrics, our springiness, and then they go onto the field and it's like just plod for the next hour. And all our qualities that we've been trying to ingrain are just gone. And like, yeah, the hamstring might be okay, but now like I just have no reactivity at the foot. The Achilles might get grumpy or whatever, So that's why I think just a little bit understanding it. You don't have to be like a biomechanist or anything, but just understanding a little bit about some of this stuff. All the stuff that you're doing on the field already becomes a bit better because you just look out for it. You coach it. You don't let these silly things happen. You don't have to have a 15 or 20 minute warm up. The lads won't get bored because it's like we've taught you this stuff and it's just pop, off you go. Now we're ready to train properly.
And how common do you, I suppose, like we mentioned maybe a bit about our listenership are very much kind of maybe field sport based or invasion sport kind of stuff, but how common do you think that kind of return to play kind of plodding along stuff is now? I suppose if we go back to when we would have all been, say, teenagers, in that, like that was the training, that was just those laps, those stuff. Now it's moved on a lot, thankfully, but how common do you see, or how common do you think it is from, say, what's presenting to you? Is it still there? Is it still kind of
it's almost
a little bit too common?
Almost 100% of the time it's still there, because like, and even I would fall into that trap myself where like, okay, like if you think about a logical enough return to play for someone with whatever, a knee problem, right? Like I'm probably going to get them doing some strength work. I'm probably going to make sure the range of motion is there. I'm probably going to introduce some like light extensive plyometrics, some bounding and single leg hopping. And then what's the next logical ish progression is just, okay, you've done your hopping, you're going to go for a jog. But like in the hops, I wouldn't let them plot. I wouldn't let them be like, between each hop there you have 2 seconds on the floor before you take that foot off. I'd be like, hop, 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 like off you go for distance here. So the next logical progression is not applaud for that from there where you go for 30%. I would rather get them hopping for 50 meters in a row where they're showing me aggressive single leg hopping, or 30 meters or 20 meters, rather than saying you just, okay, forget about all this reactivity and go and plod. I think we spend longer there. We get more aggressive there. We do, maybe instead of the jogging, plodding stuff, we start to work on like you'll see track and field athletes doing like A skips, B skips, ankling drills, all of this stuff where I'm not moving that fast, but there is a pop off the floor all of the time, and I'm ingraining good running mechanics. So a lot of that stuff should come in then, and then we can work on like 70%, 80% sprinting, hill sprints if we want, pulling a sled, whatever it is. And we just kind of skip a lot of the crappy plodding mechanics, and if they do need to work on fitness, they can kind of get that somewhere else, I think, They're not going to be perfect coming back fit anyway. So like we just have to, I think we have to be careful, and it's an opportunity to get athletes back moving way better than they ever were before.
It's very interesting now to see things that way. Yeah, it's I suppose to move on a little bit from maybe those lower body kind of mechanics and stuff. You mentioned about breathing earlier and the importance of it, and I know it's something that you've been speaking about quite a bit, but that, and I suppose core, I'd love to kind of get your insights into, like, when athletes, in my experience, think of core, they think of your sit-ups, your Russian twists, like they're thinking of the of what looks good when they get onto a beach once the top comes off. Yeah. But could you give a little bit of an idea of what, I suppose, core, your core strength actually is, the importance of it, and that control over your core, and then we might move on towards a little bit of the importance of breathing and training that in as well.
Yeah, good question. There's a lot in it. So the abdominals are very, very, very important, right? That just doesn't just mean the rectus abdominis, like the obliques, the transverse abdominis, like any of the deeper core muscles, and spine. Like I would consider your spine, like your erector spinal muscles and all of that stuff. Anything around that midsection, very, very important. And we especially when you look at like lower body injuries and issues like hamstring tears, they're starting to think that, I think, but the research is kind of starting to show that like an uncontrolled or an excessive anterior pelvic tilt has a role to play in a hamstring tear. And when, like, I think it's a massive factor, to be honest. I get very good athletes who have the best NordBoard scores, the best Nordic curl scores, and they keep injuring their hamstrings. So at some point we have to say, okay, are you just going to keep putting all your eggs in the eccentric hamstring strength basket? Or are you going to say, actually, I have poor running mechanics and poor control over the pelvis? And yeah, so no matter how strong I get, when I start to get fatigued, that pelvis spills forward into an anterior tilt, and the hamstring is just not as strong anymore in that position. So one of the things that is very important to keep the pelvis under control is abdominals. And one of the things that influences that is the pelvis and the rib cage. And so we have to start with, I think we have to start with breathing mechanics, because as soon as we start to become stressed, if you think about someone stressed, if you think about someone who breathes poorly, their ribs will always just flare up at the front. And like we spoke about earlier, the ribs flare up at the front, the pelvis spills forward at the front. So we would have to teach someone to exhale and get the ribs to come back down again. And when they do that, they'll feel their abdominals 10 times more than in any real core drill. At least they'll feel their deeper abdominals rather than just their six pack all of the time. So it starts with breathing, it starts with rib cage. Most people's compensations start to occur in their body from the ribs out. I think it's the most, like, if you think about the center of the body, the most proximal structure is somewhere around there. And we all are asymmetrical in how we breathe. Like, we have an extra lobe of lung on the right side, we have a heart on the left side, that keeps my left chest a bit more open. There's loads of this stuff, and we can start to assess people and say, right, you can't internally rotate your right hip, or you're more likely to get a hip impingement on your right side. Why is that the case? Because you actually breathe really poorly, I think, in the first place. So we start to see these asymmetries crop up, and a lot of that comes back to how someone breathes. So you can look at someone breathing and you can kind of predict, okay, you won't be able to internally rotate your right shoulder. So the core does start with the rib cage, I think, getting that breathing well, and that's what gets this optimal length tension relationship of all the abdominals. So if we can't, it's just like the glutes, kind of this thing about getting the glutes to fire. They'll only fire if not fire, that's a bad word. They're firing, of course, but they'll only be really good like if the sequencing is correct, the bones are in the right position, the timing is good, and the abdominals are the same. So we have to get the bones in the right position first. Ribs and pelvis starts there. Teach people what like a stack looks like in terms of ribs are over pelvis, and then teach people, I think fluidity is where the core is at, like in terms of medicine ball drills, throws, not trying to be super stiff through the core or worry too much about planks or sit-ups. But like if you look at the best movers in the world, their spine moves really well, they're fluid in 3 planes of motion, and the abdominals are like lengthening and shortening, and there's this kind of corkscrew effect happening through the body. And I think it's one of the things I think the gym, like traditional strength and conditioning, does poorer than anything else is training the core. I think traditional strength and conditioning comes from powerlifters, really. Like, it's not that old. It comes a couple of 100 years old from powerlifters. And if you look at a powerlifter walking, they are probably like a fridge, like they can't rotate. Their pelvis and ribs can't move opposite to each other. And so, of course, the core muscles won't load because they can't actually lengthen and shorten them in the transverse plane rotation-wise. So we often train athletes to move their spine like a powerlifter moves their spine, which is brace as hard as you can, don't let any movement happen in the midline, and just lift as much weight as possible. And that is actually a really good strategy if I want to do a really heavy back squat, because I don't want anything to move. But as soon as I start to take that strategy from the gym onto the field with me, and we've all seen this, particularly in GAA, we've all seen the fella who came back after 6 months and he now just moves like an absolute block. And he's very strong, he looks good in the jersey, but he can't really run anymore. So as soon as we take that strategy from the gym onto the field and into our even walking with us, it doesn't matter how many sit-ups you can do, you can't actually rotate your spine, your rib cage anymore, and you've lost a lot of fluidity, and that is a big red flag for me.
Yeah, I just the moment you mentioned that block of a footballer, there's images going through my head. There's plenty of them around at the
mirror.
moment, I feel.
Yeah. But you look at you look at the best teams now. You look at the likes of like a lot of the Dublin footballers. They don't look like that anymore. Football did go that way for a little while, and like strength and size was everything, but now like lads need to cover ground. There's so much running going on. You look at basketballers, like they have to be fluid, and it's not, you can have both. It's not, I don't want people to think you can't strength train. You definitely can, but you just don't want that strength training to start to take away range of motion and fluidity around the middle of your body or anywhere in your body. And I unfortunately think that it does for a lot of people, especially. You don't even need to change up that much, but exercise selection becomes important and cueing becomes important. Do I always want someone to squeeze their shoulder blades back in every single lift that you've ever done in the gym? Like if you think about a Nordic curl, like chest up, a bench press, chest up, a row, chest up, a pull up, chest up, a deadlift, chest up, a back squat, chest up, and everything is just driving that chest up, driving that pelvis forward, squeezing the entire back of the rib cage together. And what do I do as soon as I move out into the pitch? If I move well, everything is a reach, everything is protraction of the shoulder and rotation. There is no such thing as squeeze your shoulder blades together in any field sport that I know, because that takes away all of our rotation.
I think our ways of defining strong, particularly as you go up the levels now, become more elite, has become quite different. It's not just how much you can lift, it's how much you can lift in a way relative to your own body weight, but also how strong you are through and at certain specific ranges, as opposed to the weight on the bar as you lift it. Such as you said, the isometric strength in the hamstring when it's, slightly flexed at the knee, or through 90 degrees of flexion, or whatever it might be that way.
Yeah, exactly. So like, I have worked with a few of particularly Australia's strongest powerlifters, and like, they can't do them. They can squat a house, but they can't do any of them hamstring isometrics that are in like running specific joint angles. They literally can't do any of my ones for 3 seconds. So like, would you call that person strong in that position? No, they're just strong relative to their task. And I don't even want them to be. I don't want them powerlifters to be that fluid. I just want, like, their sport is brace, move up and down 6 inches, and like, don't break anything. Like, just stay as stiff as possible. And I just want to be able to give them back just enough so that they can continue to do that, just enough movement so that they can still feel good and walk throughout their day. But that is not the same prerequisite for an athlete that needs to be able to run and change direction and take contact and have my eyes looking somewhere where I'm catching a ball and holding someone off somewhere else. So different tasks. And strong, you're right, I think strong is that definition is starting to change.
If we think of our main field sports, like, the key movements are, you're going to do a lot of high speed running, so sprinting or close to sprinting speed. You're going to be changing direction, jumping and landing, and then taking contact generally in or around the shoulder area. So the stronger we are around those areas to support all that movement, is probably, it's obviously you want to be more powerful for the stuff you do. But if you get injured from the key movements of the sport, you obviously can't get better because you're sitting on the sideline watching train. So the more support you can give to those areas so that you're not getting injured and you can cope with all those demands, obviously the more chance you have then of just being able to keep attending training.
Yeah, and don't forget as well, strength is also coordination, because like we spoke about earlier, I can be very strong, but can my muscles develop tension fast enough when my foot hits the floor to protect my ankle joint, protect my knee joint? So can the muscles like overcome? Franz Bosch talks about it quite a lot, like overcoming muscle slack. So it's how quickly can they actually develop tension, build tension, and when do they let go of that tension? So strength and coordination are they need to kind of happen together, rather than just being strong around an area. It's no good if my muscles actually can't build that tension quick enough. Like ACLs blow out in, I don't know what the literature says now, in like milliseconds. Like, it's too late to say, oh, my quad should have contracted there, or I needed to have a stronger quad. Maybe it just needed to be able to build tension a lot quicker and get them pre-tension and get them co-contractions sooner in the movement. So that's also very, very important when we talk about movement.
And when it comes to like on-pitch work, particularly we have gyms now, but some aren't that accessible, and some teams, clubs just don't have a gym. They just have the pitch and maybe minimal equipment. What are some key things we can build in? Like, I know I mentioned to start the lunge with various perturbations around it, but around the ankle, like, is a calf raise too simple? Is it something that can still be used but developed on further? And rather some kind of key exercise that, and we think of really low hanging fruit at the end or at the start of a pitch session, what's some stuff we can start implementing there?
Calf raises are good, definitely. Like, I would usually have seated calf raises anyway in the gym in most of my programs for athletes, because I just think you can't probably be strong enough down there. In terms of the calf and the ankle, like, I think if most people went and learned from a really good track and field coach, they would learn, like, if you look at me doing a plyometric versus Phil Healy doing a plyometric, you will say which one's ankle actually works really well. It's Phil Healy, right? So I would say, like, any good track and field coach that can teach you, like, where you're supposed to be in space, what these drills could look like. I think that's really valuable. I don't think we, especially in the GA world, don't take advantage of that enough. But like, if you look at the States, like, I was shocked when I started to consult with more strength and conditioning coaches over there. Like, they really have a culture of track and field over there. They all pretty much, when you're young, you will do track and field when you're younger, and you'll be exposed to these different types of movements. And they just tend to run better than us, I think. And it's a lot of it is technique. Some of it is strength, definitely, but a lot of it is technique. So I think it's not the time in a training session to change a million things, but definitely in the gym you can change things, and definitely in the warm up you can change things. And like, if every single warm up you did for 6 months, you had 3 or 4 drills that were really ingraining like good mechanics at the ankle and the knee and the hip, like, that's a lot of reps for young people, especially young people, like athletes who have never done it before, because there's so much low hanging fruit there. So I think like, learning from a track and field coach is massive. I'm definitely not a track and field coach.
Yeah, I've been on a few webinars with Shane McCormick, Phil Healy's coach, actually, and he just says wickets, your line starts, little things like that. You just get so much from those. Like, I'm hammering wickets now with a couple of teams I'm working with.
Yeah,
a lot of single leg popping stuff and all like that. It gets you so much, both in terms of reducing injuries, but also developing power and increasing coordination, stiffness, and everything around that.
And if Phil Healy is doing that for 10 years and still doing those drills, like, as part of pretty much every warm-up she ever does, like skips, A skips, B skips, over hurdles, different things like that, then if we can give an athlete who's never done it and do it every training session, which takes 2 or 3 minutes or 5 minutes as part of a warm-up, like, the gains are massive there, I think.
Because you're still working through nice ranges of motion and stuff there as well, around the hip and the knee and everything. So it's not the case of, I really don't want to be taking up my stretches here. You're probably getting as much range of motion, but it's far more useful and relevant ranges of motion as opposed to the standard stretches that we used to do.
Take out your stretches. Get rid of them. Get active range of motion. Get people up on their feet. Get contact. Get perturbations in warm-ups. Get running drills in. Like, I would say forget about the stretches, in my opinion anyway. I'm not saying I'm right, it's just what I think at the moment.
And that's something that has come up maybe in the last 3 or 4 podcasts in a row, where it's just been like, people questioning the quantity and even the inclusion of stretching at all pre going out to try and create that shorten range of motion. You're trying to create that power, but you're stretching out prior to it. You're kind of going 2 opposite directions there. But so when it comes to just to go back to developing the breathing, to develop like good quality breathing practices, what kind of, I suppose, guidelines would you kind of say, when you mention low hanging fruit there, from a breathing perspective? Where would you kind of like to see people start off? They were trying to train in breathing technique a bit better.
Yeah. So there's a couple of ways of looking at it. One is like the physiology involved and like being able to feel a little bit better under stress or working on my breathing. I'm more interested in, yes, definitely that, but the biomechanics of breathing and what it does to my hips. Like, basically, some people do my programs and it's like, I had hip problems for the last 10 years. I've had 200 physio sessions and stretched every day, and I just did 2 breathing drills and it's gone. So it's like, it's not the disclaimer, I'm not saying that's going to happen to everyone, but it's the biomechanics, what it does to our bones is what's really cool, the effect it has on our pelvis. But I like to start people on the floor, on their back. This wouldn't be like in a training session or anything like that. I like to start people on the floor, on their back, knees are bent, hands are on the rib cage at the front, so the more around the lower ribs. So just for feedback, you can feel them, and I would start people exhaling out of their mouth, like they're kind of blowing up a balloon. Now that doesn't mean like puffer fish cheeks and like big neck contraction. It just means like keep blowing, keep blowing, keep blowing, like you're blowing through a straw. And I would like to see people being able to exhale for 10 to 15 seconds, getting rid of all the air. But it only actually counts if you start to feel the ribs kind of closing from side to side. So as I exhale, because some people will exhale, they'll blow, but the ribs won't actually move. And some of the most joints in our body are around the rib cage, and if I said to you, you have an elbow joint there that just doesn't move at all, you'd say, oh Jesus, I better get that moving. And if I said to you, you have a rib cage that just is like a cinder block, it doesn't move, and these attached to the spine, thoracic spine, and all of this stuff, like you'd want to get that moving. So nice 10-15 second exhale, feel the ribs close. We want to pause for a couple of seconds where like I don't just sniff and pull air straight back in. I have this little pause. I inhale softly through my nose. So like just feel that air come in. And I don't want to see the ribs kind of fly back up again where they started. It's more of this like 360 degree expansion where the whole rib cage gently opens in every direction rather than the whole rib cage at the front just flying back up again. So that's a really good place for people to start. If they even just try it sitting down and try that, they'll realize they can't exhale for that much. Two, their ribs actually don't really move at all. Like I would be cueing people like that your ribs should be moving 6 inches further than they're actually moving here. And 3, they can't pause. They get this like fight or flight response where they're like, oh, I need to gasp in air or pull in air through my mouth. And 4 is that they can't inhale in a silent, relaxed, fluid way where it just falls in and starts to expand. You'll start to see that it all like kind of flies into the lower ribs. The lower ribs fly back up again, and that's kind of pushing us back into that really extended posture that is okay at times, but not something we always want to be in. And if my breathing is always pushing me into that 22,000 breaths a day, then you can't expect to have not to have tight hip flexors because your pelvis is going forward all of the time, and you really can't expect 3 sets of 10 of a glute clam to start to get your glutes to quote unquote fire because they're not in the position where they actually would do that.
And what's a realistic time frame to dedicate to that? Is it like get up in the morning and spend 10 minutes focused on your breathing? Is it just a few times throughout the day? Like how could people go about building that in now and say, okay, over the next 2 weeks, 6 weeks, I really want to make an improvement on this so it does start to become subconscious?
Well, in the Lower Body Basics program, I think I have 2 breathing drills each of the days. So like each day you do two breathing drills to begin with, and I actually have like a video there to say don't skip this. Like yes, you will feel the harder hamstring stuff and you'll be like, oh, that's hard. Don't skip the breathing drills. It's probably as important or more important to get it right because the pelvis will be in a really good position then. So I wouldn't like that to be taking more than 5 minutes of people's time. So 5 minutes a day, like even just less, like even lying on your back once a day, doing 5 breaths, relaxing for a minute, doing another 5 breaths there. People will see really big benefits from that. Like they'll feel more relaxed. They'll feel their pelvis moves better, their ribs move better if they do it right. If they don't do it right, just like anything, they won't feel anything. And it just depends on the position then. So like if I lie on my back, I'm probably gonna get more air into the sides of my rib cage because the back of my ribs is closed and gravity is kind of coming down on my chest more so I'm going to get that, like it's going to go more into the side. If I lie on my side, my sides are closed and it's going to go maybe more front to back the air and get expansion in the chest and the back of the rib cage. There's a million different positions and but that just becomes a little bit more detailed, but people don't really need to know that. It's just to start, the low-hanging fruit is learn to exhale and get rid of every bit of air that was ever in your body and close the ribs at the front. That's a massive start for a lot of people.
There's quite a bit there, and it is fascinating. I hope, like for people listening, that they do kind of see the connection literally from the breath coming in through your nose to the impact that can have right down throughout your body. It's brilliant. There's some of the big kind of things, but it's great to see that like you can actually just spend a small bit of time there. It's one of the big issues that we often, or that I often come across, is just people's inability to even just breathe through their nose. You know, to start that off, and that can be challenging enough. But again, I suppose it's like anything really. It needs reps. It needs you know, actual time and focus.
Yeah, big time, especially on the nose. Like there's some breathing drills that we can practice, but we would like to observe someone just breathing through their nose throughout the day. It's why we have a nose, and it's the mouth is like a secondary thing where, like, if someone is squeezing my nose, like, I need to get air in, I will get it in through the mouth. It will keep me alive, but it's not what I want to have happen all of the time. So especially for people who wake up quite stiff, like if I have a client and they say I wake up with a stiff back in the morning, or my hips are so stiff in the morning, like, I can almost guarantee they're breathing through their mouth for the entire night. Because the only movement that's happening through the night should be, like, my diaphragm is getting a chance to pump, and that's almost a massage for my internal organs, and like everything just gets a chance to open and close. Whereas when I breathe through my mouth, people can even try this, it's more of a, and as soon as I like that, my whole ribs at the front lift up. Like, I can't actually even avoid that. It's just that happens, which means when my ribs at the front lift up, my front opens, my back is going to close. So I can put my hand on my back and do that breath, and I'll feel my back muscles really contract hard. So 8 hours of doing that, and also that also means, like, my neck is going to be quite tight, because they're accessory breathing muscles as well. They're trying to pull air in for me. Probably means my hip flexors are going to be quite tight, because kind of back and hip flexors kind of go together, and then like glutes and hamstrings kind of go together, and abs. So definitely low hanging fruit there if we're breathing through our mouth. I can't advise people to put a little bit of tape on their mouth, because I don't want people to sue me, but someone might advise, their doctor might advise, that they should put a small bit of tape on their mouth and see if they can get that air to come in through the nose, and then they can send a thank you message to their doctor that they don't wake up as stiff anymore.
What do you do during hay fever season?
Yeah, so you wouldn't get as much hay fever, I would say, if you actually breathe it really well through your nose. Because it's going to filter, the nose is also a filter. It's going to filter out a lot of that crap. So a lot of the hay fever people also breathe in through their mouth. They're not getting that filtering happening.
I'm going to try that now and see.
Yeah,
it makes sense though. It makes sense. It makes sense that the nose is a filter. The mouth, the nose also warms up the air as it comes in, like it slowly comes in. The mouth is just like this sharp breath that's coming in. My body really doesn't react well to that.
Yeah, no, that's fantastic. That was my next kind of follow up. What was your view on sleep tape, or like taping over there for a night? Yeah, so that's another small thing, but yeah, disclaimer: speak to your doctor before taking our advice.
Just lastly, conscious of your time, David, one thing I'm always wondering about is tendinopathies, and like generally talk to people around, you know, lack of strength or whatever like that. Is there a coordination element built into tendinopathies?
I think there's a coordination element built into everything. There is, because that's how we move, and that's how we distribute load to areas and away from areas. So yes, because when you, like, especially if you see someone with a tendinopathy, you'll see them avoiding movements now, and suddenly the coordination is altered. And even, I have a problem with this sometimes, because even when we get rid of a tendinopathy or someone is not in pain, you'll actually continue to see their coordination being altered, and like the compensations that they develop to avoid that pain will still be there. So there's a coordination element to everything. I think more so with regards to the Achilles tendon than the patellar tendon, because patellar tendon seems to be something that I work with a lot, and had a lot of issues with that myself in the past. Seems to be just a lot of load causes patellar tendon, so just low, like poor loading, too much loading. I get a very cranky knee. Achilles, I hear that and I see that in the literature as well, but yet when we work with people with Achilles and we get their foot moving really, really well again, I see Achilles tendons sometimes, not all the time now, but like a lot of the time start to get a lot better when they actually learn to load their midfoot better and get their calcaneus to move better, and get the pelvis into a good position and moving really well. So I think, yes, I think the Achilles and proximal hamstring tendon, more coordination involved and more like, which is cool because there's more things and more benefits we can get very quickly from that. Patellar tendon, yes, but you have to make sure the tendon gets really strong and the quads get really, really strong as well. And for all of them, you want to obviously train a lot of strength and load the crap out of them. But I think it's cool for an Achilles because you can make changes pretty quickly a lot of the time when when you work on their foot especially.
Yeah, that's great. I suppose, David, where can people reach out to find your stuff and to make contact with you?
If they don't hate me after the podcast, they can just maybe some people
If they hate you after the podcast, that's a harsh hot take.
they might, especially if they're a powerlifter and they got offended. But I must have a note on that I love powerlifters. I'm just saying we shouldn't train an athlete like a GA player like a powerlifter. That's all I'm saying. They can just go, Instagram is probably the best place, David Gray, Grey, Rehab on Instagram, and the website is the same, and they can just have a look at the stuff there, and if they don't like it, then they can unfollow me or block me or abuse me or whatever, which so some people do, but luckily not too many.
To be fair, it was a powerlifter that like really recommended we get you on, so that's what led to this. So
the amount of powerlifters that have done that, like they benefit so much from simple little things because their body has gone almost in the complete opposite direction. So definitely, I appreciate that. It just depends on the sport. Like they need to be tight, they need to be stiff, they need to not have crazy amounts of range of motion. It's what they need. So we just need to understand what other athletes need and not train everyone, I think, in the exact same way.
That's perfect. Thanks a million for today, David.
Brilliant.
Thanks for having me on.